therapist. So like if you were to tell somebody like, okay, go to therapy, what is your opinion on it? Like how would you explain to somebody why it's beneficial?
Um, so I'm actually currently having this conversation with my boyfriend because he's kind of like he's kind of like I don't know about therapy, and
Yeah.
I'm
Hmm.
a big therapy advocate. And
Hmm.
so like what I've said to him is kind of like I don't know any single person who's gone to therapy and regretted it.
Right.
No one has gone to therapy really and ever regretted it. Yeah, it might take time to find the right therapist for you, and it's just like finding friends. Like you're not going to vibe
Mhm.
with everyone, so you got to find the one that you vibe with and can trust. But I also think like therapy is something that I look forward to because it's something to just like I'm a verbal processor, and so it's somewhere that I can just like talk about things in a safe environment and have someone either like validate my feelings or say like maybe you're thinking about this a
Mhm.
little bit wrong.
Mhm.
Um and they get to know you and your past, and so they can help you, with your present and your future based on things that might come into play. Like, for example, I'm talking about some things in therapy with stuff that happened in my childhood, and my therapist can take things that are happening in my life and be like, oh, I can understand why you're feeling that way because this happened in your childhood. And she's making connections that I've never made. And then that helps me going into situations like that. Okay, I might be thinking this way because of my past. So I just need to be a little bit more cognizant of that. And um, I think it's just a safe space to talk about things. And I don't think that's ever something that's not needed,
Mhm.
honestly. I think
It should
everyone.
be it should be free and it should be thought of as like a maintenance thing. So I understand like the pushback against it. I mean, if it was free, I'm sure more people would go. And if it was, I mean, now it's easier to access like over the internet and stuff, which is
Yeah.
helpful. But when I try and talk about it, I'm like, anybody can benefit from it. This person that you're talking to doesn't know anybody. Just imagine you're talking to somebody, you can say anything you want, and they don't know any of the people you're talking about.
Right.
Like, it's just so nice to like just get it all out. Okay, we took a little break. So, let's get back on track. So, I wanted to get into more about like the types of therapy and then medications.
Okay.
So, in my experience, I see your little dog there. In my experience, it goes hand in hand. I am at the point now where I've been on medication for something for probably, wow, 18 years, seven, I don't even, that's crazy. Something like that, a long time. And a lot of the time, um, they'll have you like be followed by a therapist or a psychiatrist or whatever. Like you need to be seeing somebody. Right now, I'm not. And I kind of got out of that because I just kind of was like, oh, yeah, I will, I will, I will. And the reason that I'm doing that is because it's just another appointment and I need to get back into it. So I am a heavy advocate for therapy for sure. And I'm not listening to my own advice, but in the past, I have had to see a psychiatrist and a therapist at the same time. So doing that helps to come at it from all angles too. It's helpful to talk through it, just anything, and then it's helpful to have two people watching the medication and how it's helping you or not. So what is your experience with like were you ready to just jump in and start taking medication? And then how did that go?
So I had always kind of been um not really for medication, kind of because the stigma that comes with it,
Yeah.
honestly. And like you're taking like SSRIs, like, oh, there's something like wrong with you. And so I just kind of was never really open to medication until until I was kind of like, okay, like I was having these really bad um, reactions to the chewing and things like that. And then my friend who was seeing the psychiatrist gave me one of her pills, which I know is not allowed. But she gave me one to like calm me down, and it wasn't Xanax, it was actually just an antihistamine, I think. And I saw like how much it helped me.
Mhm.
And so that kind of opened my mind a little bit more. And then when I went to see the psychiatrist, she kind of explained to me, because I was telling her that I was seeing a therapist, and she explained medication to me in a way that made a lot of sense in my mind and kind of opened me up to it. And she was saying that basically what the medication does is like my brain pathways are just like I use the same brain pathways all the time. So
Mhm.
like if I have negative thoughts, my brain is so used to thinking
Right,
negative thoughts that it automatically takes that trail.
right.
And so what the medicine does, it just makes my brain like a little more squishy and a little like it'll bring the negative pathway up to here so that it's kind of a little bit more on par with like a new pathway being made so that my brain isn't more prone to taking the pathway it's always taken, and it's a little
Mhm.
bit more open to creating new pathways. So that's kind of how she explained it to me, where I was like, oh, that actually makes a lot of sense. And
Yeah.
that's something I would like to try. And it does make therapy easier too, because if your brain is open to, it's a little more squishy and open to new things, then the therapy is a little bit easier to process and like get through, especially the EMDR therapy, because
Mhm.
it's trying to get your brain just used to new ways of thinking.
Yeah. Wow, I do like that too. A therapist in the past told me like and I talk about this a lot, um, to imagine like a dog on a leash connected to like a stake in the ground, and it's always like running around and around, and then eventually
Yeah.
you see like the markings in the ground. And she's like, and that's what your thoughts do. Like you just go to that path that's already made. So yeah, I like the squishy part too. Like it's gives
Yeah.
you, yeah, a better idea. And then so EMDR, that is like the lights, right?
It's the movements. So like it's either tapping like this or like my therapist will go like this and I just follow her fingers.
Okay.
It's a trauma response therapy.
Okay.
So
Yeah. I know that that was recommended to me once, and I think it was the one with the lights that go in front of you. Is that the
okay.
same thing? Like they're
It
all
might
different
be.
types.
It might be. I don't know.
Yeah,
My
there might
therapist
be
just said
different
there's like
modalities or whatever to it, but
yeah.
yeah, so is that something that you knew you would like need to address, or is that stuff that came up in therapy? You were like, oh, I have this stuff in my past.
No, it's not something I necessarily knew I needed to address. I was, just talking to my therapist about my life and like my relationships with people in my family. And my therapist suggested it. She was like, you know what? I think you would really benefit from some EMDR therapy. Like you have trauma in your past.
Okay.
And to me, trauma was always like, I never thought I really had trauma. And then my therapist talked about like the big T trauma and the little T trauma. So like the
Hmm.
big T trauma is like a car accident or like
Hmm.
something really big that happens to you. And then like little T trauma is just like repeated little
Hmm.
traumatic incidents that happen. And so I didn't really know that. And so um she basically was like, you've had a lot of trauma in your past and repeated trauma. And so she thought EMDR would be really helpful to me. And, I've only done a few sessions, but going through it, it's interesting because we did like a practice session about like some guy cut me off in traffic. So we did just like a practice EMDR session about some guy cutting me off in traffic. And it's crazy what your mind relates little things to. Like the whole point of EMDR is like to dig deeper into your mind. And so a guy cut me off in traffic, and then my therapist was like, okay, so how did that make you feel? And then I would say how it made me feel. And she'd say, okay, like go with those thoughts. And so I had to keep going with those thoughts until eventually it came to like, okay, well, I'm always a problem. This man thinks I'm a problem, which is like, it's
Yeah.
crazy
Hmm.
what your mind like relates
Hmm.
little things like that back to. Like it, like, oh, that man cut me off in traffic. That's just reinstilling to me that I'm a problem to everyone. And so EMDR has been really interesting in that way.
Yeah, that's something a lot of people aren't familiar with, but I love that example because like I can see how you get there with it, but like that's just crazy because and then the big T and little T trauma, I actually worked with like an app back in the day, like 4 or 5 years ago, who was doing like mental health stuff. And long story short, I ended up talking to a lot of therapists. And that's when I learned what that was. And it helped me to take like the word trauma like and just minimize it because and I think that's what a lot of people need to do too because you hear trauma you're like oh my god that person did go through trauma like that's like traumas like like things that you think in your head like that are the worst and it, or like events or like PTSD related things.
My dog
What's
is
that?
crying. I'm sorry if my dog is crying and you can
Oh
hear
no.
him.
I can't hear anything. So, yeah, the big T and little T trauma, if you are listening and you're interested, definitely look into that because we all, I don't want to say put it on a pedestal, but like the word trauma just seems like something that not everybody could have. But if you do, it's important to address it. So it is important to like know what it is. So with your medications, you said you went through a couple different ones. How did you know what wasn't right for you? Did you have side effects like physical side effects or I mean, I guess I shouldn't say physical. Like my ones that I tried, I had like issues with my stomach and like random things like that. Other ones were more like mental. Like I felt very zombie like or like in a daze or more tired or the opposite like so what was your experience with that?
So I for the first medicine I started on was Lexapro, and I liked it, but I was noticing some weight gain.
Story of my
So
life. I was on that for like 8 years.
yeah,
Yeah.
and so then when I went back to my therapist and said I was like noticing weight gain, that's also kind of when the OCD diagnosis was coming into play. And so she put me on a mepramine, which is more targeted towards OCD symptoms.
Hmm.
And since anxiety and depression are symptoms of OCD as well, um, she was basically like, well, if you target the main OCD symptoms, then anxiety and depression will come along
Yeah.
with that.
Yeah.
So I was on that for quite a few months. And it it was not working. I didn't know it wasn't working. It was not working. I was just super emotional all the time. Like I would cry all the time. I'd get super upset about things. My boyfriend actually broke up with me during that
Oh
that time
no.
period because like I was like a little bit unstable. Like I don't know what was happening,
Yeah.
but I also couldn't see that I was being like that.
Hmm.
Um, and so like I think my boyfriend broke up with me on like a Friday and I went to my therapist or my psychiatrist on a Monday and she's like, okay, how's it going? And I was like, it's not well. It's not going well.
Oh no.
And she was like, okay, so your medicine is not working. After I
Yeah.
said everything that was going on, she was like, your meds are not working. We are going off that immediately. Um, and so we did. And I went on, geez, I don't know I'm on Zoloft now.
Me
And I'm
too.
also, and Zoloft is really working for me.
Mhm.
And I'm also on, it's called propanolol, and it is actually
Beta
a
blocker.
blood pressure. Yes,
My son's
yes.
on that for his
Oh, really?
hemangiomas. So that has a lot of different uses. Wow. Hmm.
Yeah. And has made a big difference
Wow.
because it like stops, even in chewing situations and with anxiety as well, it stops you from getting to that major fight or flight. So, like, instead of like being all the way up here, like, I'll be here. And so,
Hmm.
I I take that daily, and honestly, it makes a huge difference in my life. And then with like the Zoloft as well, what I think was a big marker to me that it was working is like all this stuff was happening at school, and I feel like normally when things like that are happening, I would just go in like a downward
Yeah.
depression spiral. I wouldn't want to hang out with anyone. I would just want to be at home, like in
Mhm.
with my dog on my couch. And that hasn't happened. I've been more like, okay, well, you know what? They're lost. And that to me was a big marker, like, wow, this is really making a big
Mhm.
difference in my life because
Mhm.